Jake Mitchell's trembling hands froze around the rusted gate handle, his breath catching in his throat as he stared at the massive black bear sitting calmly 20 feet away. The creature wasn't snarling or charging. It was watching him with an intelligence that made his war-torn mind reel. This wasn't some wild beast defending territory. The bear stood slowly, deliberately, and walked to a pile of twisted metal, placing one enormous paw on what looked like an ordinary car bumper. Jake's grandfather's letter crinkled in his sweating palm. "Bruno will show you what I couldn't tell the family." His knees nearly buckled as childhood memories crashed against present reality. Grandpa Sam feeding a pet behind the junkyard, swearing 8-year-old Jake to secrecy. The same bear, 15 years later, still alive, still waiting. Jake's phone buzzed with another threatening text from his brother Marcus. "Sell the land or we'll have you committed." What secret was worth $200 million? And why was a circus bear the only one who knew where it was hidden? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Jake Mitchell had hit rock bottom so many times he'd started to think it was his permanent address. At 34, the former Army Ranger sat in his cramped Portland studio apartment, staring at the eviction notice taped to his door. 3 tours in Afghanistan had left him with shrapnel in his leg, nightmares that wouldn't quit, and a Purple Heart that couldn't pay rent. The bottle of whiskey on his kitchen counter had become his most reliable companion, never judging, never asking questions about the screams that woke the neighbors. The call from his grandfather's lawyer had come on a Tuesday that felt like the end of everything. Sam Mitchell, the man who'd raised Jake after his parents died, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Jake hadn't spoken to the old man in 2 years, not since the family had tried to stage an intervention about his drinking. The shame of disappointing the one person who'd never given up on him burned worse than any battlefield wound. "Mitchell's salvage scrap," the lawyer had said over the phone, 40 acres in the Cascade Mountains. "Your grandfather's will specifically names you as sole inheritor with one unusual condition. You must personally care for his companion, Bruno." Jake's siblings had been anything but understanding. Marcus, his older brother, was a successful tech entrepreneur in Seattle, all sharp suits and sharper words. "Dad's finally lost it," Marcus had snarled during their heated phone call. "Giving the family business to the town drunk while Sarah and I actually contribute to society." Sarah, his twin sister, was equally furious. Her real estate empire in California had made her wealthy enough to buy the junkyard 10 times over, but she couldn't stomach the insult of being passed over for her mentally unstable younger brother. The drive to rural Oregon had taken 4 hours, winding through dense forests that reminded Jake too much of the mountains outside Kandahar. His hands shook on the steering wheel. Withdrawal or PTSD, he couldn't tell anymore. They'd become inseparable companions. The junkyard sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by towering pines and the kind of silence that made his ears ring. Rusted cars stretched across the property like a metal graveyard, their skeletal frames reaching toward the gray Pacific Northwest sky. Bruno had been mentioned in the will as grandfather's companion, but Jake had assumed it meant an old dog or maybe a cat. Nothing had prepared him for the reality of a 400-pound American black bear who moved with the careful precision of something far more intelligent than nature intended. The bear's dark eyes held a depth that reminded Jake of his grandfather's steady gaze, patient, knowing, and impossibly sad. Standing there at the gate, Jake realized that everything he thought he knew about his grandfather's quiet life had been a lie. Sam Mitchell had been keeping secrets, and somehow a circus bear held the key to all of them. Jake's first night in his grandfather's trailer was a sleepless symphony of creaking metal and distant wildlife sounds. Every shadow beyond the window could have been Bruno, and every crack of settling wood sent his hand reaching for the pistol he no longer carried. By dawn, exhaustion had dulled his paranoia enough to venture outside with a cup of instant coffee that tasted like regret. Bruno was waiting by the trailer steps, sitting with the patience of a monk. Up close, the bear was even more imposing. Thick black fur marked with gray around the muzzle, massive paws that could crush a man's skull, and those unsettling, intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog Jake's every movement. What struck him most were the scars. Thin white lines across the bear's snout, circular marks on his shoulders that looked suspiciously like electrical burns. "Morning, Bruno," Jake said tentatively, his voice hoarse from disuse. The bear's ears twitched forward at the sound of his name, and he stood slowly, walking toward a specific pile of rusted car parts about 50 yards away. When Jake didn't follow, Bruno returned, gently grasping the hem of Jake's jacket with his teeth and tugging. The pile Bruno led him to seemed random. Bent fenders, corroded engine blocks, and twisted chrome bumpers arranged with no apparent pattern. But Bruno placed his paw deliberately on a particular piece of metal, a car hood painted forest green beneath decades of rust. Jake knelt beside the bear, running his hands along the surface until his fingers found what felt like hinges hidden beneath the corrosion. "Jesus," he whispered, lifting what turned out to be a camouflaged metal box welded to look like automotive scrap. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather, was a leather-bound journal and a manila envelope thick with photographs. The first photo made Jake's blood run cold. It showed a much younger Bruno performing in a circus ring, wearing a ridiculous frilly collar while standing on his hind legs. A man with a whip stood nearby, his face twisted in cruel satisfaction. But it was the second photo that stopped Jake's breathing entirely. His grandfather, perhaps 20 years younger, standing next to Bruno in what looked like the same circus tent. Sam Mitchell's expression was one of barely contained rage. Jake's hands trembled as he opened the journal. His grandfather's precise handwriting filled page after page, but the entries were unlike anything he'd expected. March 15, 1995. Purchased Bruno from Castellano Family Circus after witnessing systematic abuse. Bear shows signs of severe psychological trauma, but remarkable intelligence. Previous owner used electric prods for training. Burns will heal, but trust may take years. April 2, 1995. Bruno responds to basic commands but flinches at sudden movements. Reminds me of soldiers returning from combat. Perhaps we can heal together. September 12, 1999. Bruno has learned to open complex locks, responds to over 50 verbal commands. His memory is extraordinary, can locate items hidden months ago. Beginning to wonder if his intelligence was always exceptional, or if trauma heightened his awareness as survival mechanism. The entries continued for years, documenting Bruno's gradual recovery and his grandfather's growing attachment to the remarkable animal, but scattered throughout were cryptic references that made Jake's skin crawl. Government work requires sacrifices. Bruno understands secrets better than most humans. Project files secured in Location Delta. Bruno knows the way. If something happens to me, Jake will need Bruno's guidance. Only the boy has enough of his grandfather's blood to understand what must be protected. Jake's phone rang, shattering the morning silence. Marcus's name appeared on the cracked screen, and Jake's finger hesitated over the decline button before answering. "Finally," Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker. "Sarah and I are driving up today. We've got buyers lined up, serious money. You can take whatever sentimental crap you want and walk away rich." "I'm not selling," Jake said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "Don't be an idiot, Jake. It's a junkyard in the middle of nowhere. What could you possibly want with 40 acres of rust?" Jake looked at Bruno, who was watching him with those knowing eyes. Maybe I want to honor what Grandpa built here." Marcus's laugh was harsh. "Honor? You mean drinking yourself to death in a trailer surrounded by garbage?" "Sarah's pulling up legal documents as we speak. Your psychiatric history doesn't exactly scream competent guardian of family assets. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're a broken-down soldier who can't hold a job or stay sober. Grandpa made a mistake, and we're going to fix it. We'll be there by noon." The line went dead. Jake stared at the phone, then at the journal in his hands. Bruno moved closer, pressing his massive head against Jake's shoulder in what could only be described as comfort. "What did he hide, boy?" Jake whispered. "And why does everyone want this place so badly?" Bruno's response was to walk toward another pile of scrap, looking back expectantly. Whatever secrets his grandfather had buried here, the bear was ready to reveal them. Bruno led Jake deeper into the junkyard's maze, past towers of crushed vehicles and mountains of twisted metal that gleamed like bones in the morning sun. The bear moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to ensure Jake was following, his massive form navigating the narrow pathways with surprising grace. They stopped at what appeared to be the remains of an old military truck, its olive-drab paint barely visible beneath rust and decay. Bruno placed both front paws on the truck's tailgate and pushed. The entire back panel swung inward like a door, revealing it was hollow, a facade hiding a concrete stairway that descended into darkness. Jake's mouth went dry as he stared into the opening, his grandfather's journal clutched tight in his sweating palm. "What the hell, Grandpa?" he whispered, pulling out his phone's flashlight. The stairs were solid, well-maintained despite their hidden location. Bruno started down without hesitation, glancing back when Jake hesitated at the threshold. The underground room was larger than Jake's entire trailer, carved from solid rock and reinforced with concrete. Battery-powered LED strips provided dim lighting, revealing walls lined with filing cabinets, maps, and photographs. At the center sat a massive safe, its steel door adorned with a combination lock that looked military-grade. But it was the walls that made Jake's knees weak. Hundreds of photographs covered every surface, surveillance shots of arms dealers, shipping manifests with classified stamps, and documentation of weapons transactions that spanned decades. His grandfather's handwriting annotated many of the images, dates, locations, dollar amounts that made Jake's inheritance suddenly seem insignificant. A manila folder marked Project Lazarus sat open on a nearby desk. Inside, Jake found documents that made his blood run cold. His grandfather hadn't been a simple junkyard owner. Samuel Mitchell had been a CIA biochemist specializing in chemical weapons research. The papers detailed a classified project from the 1980s involving the development of antidotes for nerve agents, work that had been mysteriously shut down and buried. Jake's hands shook as he read the final report. Subject termination ordered despite successful trials. Research materials classified beyond top secret. Dr. Samuel Mitchell reassigned to deep cover operations. Bruno whined softly, drawing Jake's attention to another folder labeled Personal. Inside were medical records, pharmaceutical receipts, and a letter that made Jake's vision blur. "My dearest Emma," the letter began in unfamiliar handwriting. "The doctors say I have 6 months, maybe less. Marcus doesn't know yet. I can't bear to see the fear in his eyes. The experimental treatments in Switzerland might help, but the cost, $2 million just for a chance." "I know you're reading this, Marcus, because I couldn't tell you myself. Please don't do anything foolish trying to save me. Your love is worth more than any cure." The letter was dated 3 months ago and signed by Emma Sterling, Marcus's wife. Jake's brother had been lying about everything. The sound of car engines broke the underground silence. Jake checked his phone. 11:47 a.m. Marcus and Sarah were early. Bruno's ears flattened against his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest as footsteps approached the trailer above. Jake grabbed the most important documents and stuffed them into his jacket. As they climbed back up the hidden stairs, he could hear his siblings' voices carrying across the junkyard, growing closer. Bruno carefully pushed the truck panel back into place, and they emerged to find Marcus and Sarah standing near the trailer with two men in expensive suits. "There you are," Marcus called out, his voice carrying forced cheer. "Jake, I'd like you to meet Harrison Webb from Pacific Development and his partner, Mr. Chen. They're prepared to make an extremely generous offer." Sarah stepped forward, her platinum blonde hair immaculate despite the rural setting. "Jake, you look terrible. Have you been eating? Sleeping?" Her concern seemed genuine, but Jake caught the calculating look she exchanged with Marcus. "I'm fine," Jake said, acutely aware of Bruno's massive presence beside him. The bear hadn't moved far from his side since they'd emerged from the underground room. Mr. Webb, a thin man with silver hair and predatory eyes, smiled without warmth. "Mr. Mitchell, your family has explained your situation. We're prepared to offer $4 million for this property, cash, closing within the week. That's far more than fair market value for 40 acres of, well," he gestured dismissively at the surrounding scrap metal. "4 million?" Jake's voice cracked slightly. It was more money than he'd ever dreamed of possessing. "The offer won't last long," Mr. Chen added, his accent placing him as possibly Chinese or Korean. "Land development in this area is heating up. Ski resorts, luxury cabins. You'd be wise to take advantage while the market is favorable." Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Jake, this could set you up for life. Get you into a good treatment program. Maybe buy a small place somewhere quiet. You could finally get the help you need." The concern in his brother's voice sounded genuine, but Jake thought about Emma's letter, about the desperation that would drive a man to sell weapons to terrorists just to save his wife's life. Marcus wasn't thinking clearly. Grief and fear had twisted his judgment into something unrecognizable. "I need time to think," Jake said finally. Sarah's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment. "Time? Jake, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. What could you possibly need to think about?" Bruno chose that moment to stand, his full height making even the tall businessman step backward. The bear's dark eyes fixed on Mr. Webb with unmistakable hostility, a low rumble emanating from his chest. "That thing should be in a zoo," Mr. Webb said, his voice tight with nervousness. "Keeping a wild animal like that is probably illegal." "Bruno's not wild," Jake said quietly. "He's family." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise his siblings. But looking at the bear who had guided him to his grandfather's secrets, who had somehow understood that Jake needed purpose more than he needed alcohol, Jake realized it was true. The battle lines were drawn. His family wanted him to sell and disappear quietly. But Jake was beginning to understand that his grandfather had left him something far more valuable than money. He'd left him a mission that only he and Bruno could complete. The developers left with tight smiles and thinly veiled threats about regulatory compliance issues that could make Jake's life difficult. Marcus and Sarah lingered, their earlier forced cheerfulness replaced by barely contained frustration. Jake watched them from the trailer's small window, noting how they spoke in hushed tones while gesturing toward Bruno, who lay in the shade of a rusted Buick, apparently napping but with ears that tracked every movement. "We're not giving up on this, Jake," Sarah called out as they finally headed toward their rental car. "Family looks out for family, whether you want us to or not." After they left, Jake spent the afternoon exploring his grandfather's hidden archives. Each folder revealed another layer of Samuel Mitchell's secret life, a decorated Vietnam veteran who'd been recruited by the CIA in 1975, a brilliant chemist whose work on antidotes had saved countless lives, and ultimately a man who'd discovered something so valuable that powerful people would kill to possess it. The breakthrough came when Jake found a folder marked current operations, hidden behind a false back in one of the filing cabinets. Inside were surveillance photos taken with a telephoto lens, showing his own brother Marcus meeting with known arms dealers in various international locations. The timestamps were recent, some as fresh as 2 months ago. Jake's hands trembled as he studied the images. There was Marcus shaking hands with Viktor Kozlov, a Russian arms trafficker wanted by Interpol. Another showed him boarding a private jet with Hassan al-Rashid, whose weapons had been used in attacks across the Middle East. The final photograph made Jake's stomach turn. Marcus exchanging a briefcase with Chen Wei-Ming, the same Mr. Chen who'd been at the junkyard that morning, offering $4 million for worthless scrap land. A handwritten note in his grandfather's precise script was paper-clipped to the photos. Marcus has been selling guidance systems and encrypted communication devices to terrorist networks. Estimated profit $50 million over 3 years. Purpose unknown, but recent intelligence suggests personal motivation rather than ideological. Emma's medical expenses? The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Marcus wasn't just trying to buy the junkyard, he was trying to cover his tracks. Whatever his grandfather had hidden here could expose his brother's criminal activities and destroy any chance of saving Emma's life. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your brother's actions have consequences. People have died because of the weapons he sold. Stop protecting him. A chill ran down Jake's spine. Someone else knew about Marcus's activities, and they were watching the junkyard. He looked around the underground room, suddenly feeling trapped. Bruno appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his massive form blocking the only exit, but his posture was protective rather than threatening. That evening, Jake sat on the trailer's front steps with Bruno beside him, watching the sun disappear behind the pine trees. The bear's presence was oddly comforting, a warm, solid reminder that he wasn't facing this alone. Jake had never been much of a talker, but something about Bruno's patient attention made the words come easier. You know what the worst part is? Jake said, scratching behind Bruno's ears. I always looked up to Marcus. He was the golden boy, the one who figured out how to succeed in the real world. And here I am, the family screw-up, finding out he's been selling weapons to the same kind of people who killed my squad in Afghanistan. Bruno's dark eyes reflected the dying light, and Jake could swear he saw understanding there. The bear had his own history of betrayal and abuse, his own scars from trusting the wrong people. Jake's phone rang, interrupting his brooding. The caller ID showed his brother's name, but when he answered, a woman's weak voice came through the speaker. Jake? This is Emma. Marcus doesn't know I'm calling. Jake's breath caught. Emma, how did you get this number? I found Marcus's phone. Jake, I need you to know, I never asked him to do any of this. When I found out about the weapons, about what he's been doing. Her voice broke into coughing, and Jake could hear the illness in every ragged breath. He thinks he's saving me, but I'd rather die than have blood on my hands. Emma, where are you? Seattle Presbyterian, room 847. The cancer's in my lungs now, spreading fast. Marcus has been telling me the treatments are working, but I've seen my real charts. The Swiss clinic he keeps talking about, it's experimental, unproven. He's destroying himself for a fairy tale. Jake felt a crushing weight settle on his chest. What do you want me to do? Don't let him sell any more weapons. Please. I know about the junkyard, about whatever your grandfather left there. Marcus thinks it's money, but it's something else, isn't it? Something that could stop all of this? Before Jake could answer, he heard Marcus's voice in the background, sharp with panic. Emma? Who are you talking to? The line went dead. Jake stared at his phone, his mind racing. Emma was dying, Marcus was spiraling deeper into criminal activity, and somewhere in his grandfather's files was information that could either save his brother or destroy him completely. Bruno whined softly and nudged Jake's hand with his massive head, as if sensing his turmoil. "What would you do, boy?" Jake whispered. "How do you save someone who doesn't want to be saved?" The answer came at 3 in the morning, when Jake's phone exploded with notifications. News alerts flooded his screen. Seattle tech executive wanted in international arms trafficking ring. Marcus's photo appeared on every major news website, his usually confident expression frozen in a corporate headshot that now seemed sinister. Jake's hands shook as he read the details. An FBI investigation had been building for months, tracking weapons sales linked to terrorist attacks in Syria, Nigeria, and Afghanistan. Marcus Sterling was named as a key figure in the network, accused of providing sophisticated guidance systems that had been used in attacks on civilian targets. The final paragraph made Jake's blood run cold. Federal agents raided Sterling's Seattle home Tuesday evening but found it empty. Sterling and his terminally ill wife are believed to have fled the country. Anyone with information regarding their whereabouts should contact the FBI immediately. Bruno appeared in the trailer doorway, his fur damp with morning dew. The bear looked at Jake with an expression that seemed almost human in its concern. Jake realized he'd been sitting in the dark for hours, staring at his phone screen until his eyes burned. "They're running," Jake told Bruno. "Marcus and Emma are in the wind, and now everyone's going to be looking for them. The FBI, the arms dealers Marcus betrayed, the families of people killed by his weapons." His phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed unknown, but Jake answered anyway. "Jake Mitchell?" The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight southern accent. "Who's asking?" "Agent Caroline Hayes, FBI. I believe you've recently inherited property from your grandfather, Samuel Mitchell. We need to talk." Jake's mouth went dry. "About what?" "Your grandfather was providing intelligence to our counter-terrorism unit for the past 5 years. His work helped us identify your brother's criminal activities. We have reason to believe Marcus may try to contact you or visit your property. And if he does? Mr. Mitchell, your brother is connected to weapons that have killed hundreds of innocent people. If he contacts you, you need to let us know immediately, for your own safety as much as ours." Jake looked at Bruno, who was watching him intently. "What if there's another way? What if Marcus could provide information to help you stop the people above him in the network?" Agent Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Mitchell, are you saying you know how to contact your brother?" "I'm saying maybe there's a way to save my sister-in-law's life and get justice for those victims at the same time. But I'm going to need some guarantees." As Jake negotiated with the FBI agent, Bruno moved to the window and stared out at the junkyard. The bear's posture was tense, alert, as if he sensed something approaching through the forest. Jake followed his gaze but saw only darkness between the trees. The game was changing, and all the players were converging on a 40-acre junkyard in rural Oregon. Jake just hoped he and Bruno were smart enough to survive what was coming. The call from Marcus came at dawn, just as Jake was feeding Bruno strips of salmon from the trailer's ancient freezer. The bear's massive head turned toward the phone's ringtone, his ears flattening against his skull in what Jake had learned to recognize as anticipation of trouble. "Jake, thank God." Marcus's voice was strained, desperate in a way Jake had never heard before. Background noise suggested he was calling from a car, highway sounds mixing with Emma's labored breathing. "I need your help. Emma's getting worse and we can't go to a hospital. They're watching everything." "Where are you?" "Heading your way. We'll be there in 2 hours. Jake, I know what you must think of me, but Emma doesn't deserve this. She never knew about the weapons until last week, and now she's paying the price for my choices." Jake closed his eyes, thinking of Agent Hayes' warnings about harboring a fugitive. "Marcus, the FBI contacted me. They know about everything, the arms deals, the terrorist connections. If you come here, you're putting all of us in danger." "There's nowhere else to go." Marcus's voice cracked. Every account is frozen. Every safe house is compromised. The people I worked with, they want me dead for talking to the FBI. Emma has maybe days left, and I can't even get her proper medical care." Bruno whined softly, pressing his massive head against Jake's leg. The bear seemed to sense the emotional turmoil radiating from the phone conversation. "What exactly do you want from me?" Jake asked. "Grandfather's research. I know he worked on chemical antidotes for the government. Emma was exposed to some kind of nerve agent during her humanitarian work in Syria. That's why she's really dying. The cancer story was a cover because the truth would have exposed my weapon sales to the region." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Emma's illness wasn't natural. It was a direct result of Marcus's criminal activities. Chemical weapons made with his guidance systems had been used against the very refugee camps where Emma was providing medical aid. "Jesus, Marcus, you poisoned your own wife." "You think I don't know that?" Marcus screamed, his composure finally shattering. "You think I don't lie awake every night knowing that my greed killed the only person who ever loved me? But maybe grandfather's research can save her. Maybe there's still time to make this right." Jake looked at Bruno, who was watching him with those intelligent dark eyes. The bear had lived through his own trauma, survived abuse that would have broken lesser creatures, yet he'd found a way to trust again. Maybe redemption was possible even for someone as far gone as Marcus. 2 hours, Jake said finally. "But Marcus, I can't promise anything. Grandfather's research may not even exist anymore." "It exists," Marcus said with surprising certainty. "I've been tracking pharmaceutical patents and classified research for years. Samuel Mitchell developed something called Compound Lazarus in the 1980s, a universal antidote for nerve agents. The CIA buried it because it would have undermined their chemical weapons program." After ending the call, Jake descended into his grandfather's hidden archive. Bruno followed, settling into his usual position as guardian while Jake searched through decades of classified documents. He found the Lazarus files buried in a safe within the safe, protected by a combination that turned out to be Bruno's birth year. The research was staggering in its scope and implications. His grandfather had developed not just an antidote but a comprehensive treatment protocol that could neutralize most known chemical weapons. The formula was elegant, revolutionary, and completely suppressed by government agencies that viewed it as a threat to national security interests. But there was a catch that made Jake's blood run cold. The final notes, written in his grandfather's increasingly shaky handwriting, revealed the terrible truth. Compound Lazarus requires fresh neural tissue from American black bears for synthesis. The specific proteins found in their brainstem cannot be replicated artificially. Each dose requires the death of a 400-pound adult male. Jake stared at Bruno, understanding flooding through him like ice water. His grandfather hadn't just rescued the bear from circus abuse. He'd saved Bruno from becoming the key ingredient in a miracle cure. The bear wasn't just a pet or guardian. He was a walking pharmaceutical factory that could save Emma's life, but only at the cost of his own. The sound of car engines broke Jake's horrified reverie. Through the small basement window, he could see 2 vehicles approaching, a black SUV that looked government-issued and a battered Honda that matched the description of Marcus's escape vehicle. Both arrived simultaneously, parking on opposite sides of the junkyard like opposing armies. Jake climbed the stairs with Bruno behind him, his mind reeling with impossible choices. Save Emma and murder Bruno, or protect the bear, and let his sister-in-law die from poisoning caused by her own husband's crimes. Marcus stumbled out of the Honda, supporting Emma's frail form. She looked like a ghost. Hollow cheeks, yellowed skin, breathing that rattled with each labored inhalation. Jake's breath caught as he saw his brother's appearance. hollow-eyed, unshaven, wearing clothes that reeked of desperation, and 3 days on the run. From the SUV emerged Agent Hayes, a stern-faced woman in her 40s with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. She was flanked by 2 tactical officers whose hands rested casually on their sidearms. "Marcus Sterling," Agent Hayes called out, her voice carrying across the junkyard. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit terrorism, arms trafficking, and accessory to murder. Step away from your wife and put your hands where we can see them." "Wait!" Jake stepped between the 2 groups, Bruno moving protectively to his side. The bear's presence seemed to give everyone pause. Even hardened federal agents weren't sure how to handle a 400-pound wild animal in the middle of an arrest situation. "Jake, don't interfere," Agent Hayes warned. "Your brother is responsible for weapons that killed American soldiers, the same soldiers you served with." "I know what he's done," Jake said, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. "But arresting him now won't bring back the dead, and it won't stop the people at the top of this network." Marcus looked at Jake with desperate hope. "You found it, didn't you? Grandfather's research? Emma doesn't have long. Please, Jake. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but she's innocent in all of this." Agent Hayes's expression hardened. "Mr. Mitchell, if you're harboring classified materials, I might be willing to share everything," Jake interrupted. "But I want something in return. Full immunity for Emma, and a plea deal for Marcus that involves him testifying against his suppliers. The real monsters in this network are still out there." Emma collapsed against the Honda's fender, her body racked with coughing that produced flecks of blood. The nerve agent was destroying her nervous system from the inside out, and they all knew she had hours, not days. "The research requires a component that's ethically complicated," Jake said carefully, looking at Bruno. "Even if we had the formula, the cost might be too high." Marcus followed Jake's gaze to the massive bear, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "No." "Jake, you can't be serious. I won't let Emma live knowing we murdered an innocent animal." "It's the only way," Jake said quietly. "One life for another." Bruno's proteins could synthesize enough antidote to save Emma and dozens of other nerve agent victims. Bruno seemed to understand the conversation's gravity. The bear walked slowly to Emma, who looked up at him with wonder despite her pain. With infinite gentleness, Bruno lowered his massive head and nuzzled her hand. Emma's tears fell onto his dark fur as she whispered, "I'm so sorry. For all of it." The bear looked back at Jake, and in those dark eyes, Jake saw something that broke his heart: acceptance. Bruno had survived torture, abandonment, and years of exploitation, yet he was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for people who had caused him nothing but pain. Agent Hayes stepped forward, her weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to step away from the animal and surrender any classified materials immediately. This situation has gone far enough." Jake looked at his dying sister-in-law, his broken brother, the federal agents who represented a system that had failed them all, and finally at Bruno, the one creature in this entire mess who possessed true nobility. The decision he made in the next few seconds would determine who lived, who died, and whether justice meant punishment or redemption. Jake's decision came with the weight of Solomon's judgment. He looked at Bruno, whose dark eyes held no fear, only the quiet dignity of a creature who had already survived the worst humanity could offer. The bear understood what was being asked of him, and his acceptance was more heartbreaking than any plea for mercy could have been. "I'll do it," Jake said quietly, his voice barely audible over Emma's labored breathing. "I'll extract what's needed from Bruno to save Emma." Marcus collapsed to his knees in the gravel, his face a mask of anguish. "Jake, no. I can't live with that blood on my hands. Emma wouldn't want this." "Emma's unconscious," Agent Hayes pointed out grimly, holstering her weapon as she knelt beside the dying woman. Her pulse is thready, and she's showing signs of neurological shutdown. Whatever you're going to do, it needs to happen now. Jake's hands shook as he descended back into his grandfather's hidden laboratory, Bruno following with his usual patient dignity. The bear seemed to understand this would be their final journey together. In the underground archive, Jake found his grandfather's detailed surgical notes and the specialized equipment needed for the extraction procedure. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was about to perform veterinary surgery to save a human life, using knowledge gained from decades of government research into chemical weapons. His grandfather had hidden this terrible choice from the world, knowing that no one should have to decide between one innocent life and another. Bruno lay down on the examination table without being asked, his massive form filling the space designed for smaller animals. Jake's vision blurred with tears as he prepared the anesthetic, a cocktail of drugs that would put Bruno into a peaceful, permanent sleep before the extraction began. "I'm sorry, boy," Jake whispered, stroking the bear's fur. "You deserve so much better than this world gave you." Bruno's response was to lick Jake's hand gently, his eyes holding no accusation, only the same patient love he'd shown throughout their brief time together. It was forgiveness Jake didn't deserve, grace he couldn't comprehend. As Jake prepared to insert the IV line, his hands trembling with grief and responsibility, Bruno did something unexpected. The bear stood up from the table, walked to a corner of the laboratory Jake had never fully explored, and began pawing at what appeared to be solid concrete. "What is it, boy?" Jake followed, wiping tears from his eyes. Bruno's claws had revealed scratches in the floor that formed a pattern, not random damage, but deliberate markings that looked almost like letters. Jake knelt and traced the scratches with his finger. They spelled out a single word: alive. His grandfather's final secret revealed itself as Jake found the hidden compartment Bruno had uncovered. Inside were dozens of vials filled with a clear liquid, each labeled with dates spanning the past 5 years. A note in his grandfather's handwriting explained everything. Neural proteins can be extracted from living bears through spinal taps, similar to bone marrow donation in humans. Bruno has been donating regularly since 2018. Each extraction provides enough material for 3 to 5 antidote doses. The bear experiences discomfort but no permanent harm. I've been secretly treating chemical weapons victims worldwide using this method. Jake's legs gave out as relief flooded through him. Bruno wouldn't have to die. The bear had been a willing participant in saving lives for years, and there were already enough extracted proteins to save Emma and dozens of other victims. Racing back upstairs with the vials, Jake found the situation had deteriorated rapidly. Emma was convulsing, her body shutting down as the nerve agent completed its deadly work. Agent Hayes was performing CPR while Marcus held his wife's hand, sobbing apologies she couldn't hear. "Move aside," Jake commanded, surprising everyone with his authority. He'd found his grandfather's treatment protocols, complete with dosage calculations and administration methods. The antidote required precise timing and careful monitoring, but the instructions were clear. Jake inserted an IV line into Emma's arm with the steady hands of someone who'd performed battlefield medicine under fire. The antidote went in slowly, a clear liquid that represented years of his grandfather's secret humanitarian work and Bruno's quiet sacrifice. "How long before we know if it's working?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse from crying. "The protocol says neurological function should begin returning within 30 minutes, Jake replied, checking Emma's pulse. "But complete recovery could take days or weeks, depending on how much damage the nerve agent caused." Agent Hayes watched the procedure with professional interest. "Your grandfather was treating chemical weapons victims without government authorization? He was saving lives while the government buried the cure to protect political interests," Jake said bluntly. Bruno and my grandfather were heroes. The real criminals are the officials who classified this research and let people die rather than admit they had a solution." 27 minutes after the injection, Emma's eyes fluttered open. Her first word was, "Marcus," spoken in a whisper that carried more love than recrimination. Marcus sobbed as he held her hand, feeling strength return to her grip for the first time in months. "The pain's gone," Emma said wonderingly. "I can breathe again." Agent Hayes stepped forward, her expression softer than before. "Mrs. Sterling, you're going to recover fully. But I need you to understand that your husband is still facing serious criminal charges." Emma struggled to sit up, her movements weak but determined. "Agent Hayes, I need to tell you something about the weapons Marcus sold. He wasn't working alone, and he wasn't at the top of the network." What Emma revealed changed everything. During her medical work in Syria, she'd discovered that the nerve agent attacks weren't random terrorism. They were field tests conducted by a rogue faction within the CIA itself. Marcus had unknowingly been selling weapons to his own government operatives, who were using them to test chemical agents on civilian populations. "The man who recruited Marcus called himself Chen Wei-Ming," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "But I recognized him from my medical training. His real name is Dr. Richard Chen, former head of biochemical research at Fort Detrick. He's been running unauthorized weapons tests in conflict zones for years." Agent Hayes's expression darkened. Dr. Chen was supposed to be dead. His research was shut down after ethical violations in the 1990s. "He's very much alive," Emma said, "and he's been using Marcus's weapons to conduct human experiments with chemical agents. When I started asking questions about the unusual symptoms I was treating, someone decided I needed to be silenced." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Emma hadn't been an accidental casualty of Marcus's weapons sales. She'd been deliberately targeted for assassination because she'd discovered a government conspiracy. Marcus's frantic efforts to save her weren't just about love. They were about exposing the truth before the real criminals could cover their tracks. "We need to contact your superiors immediately," Jake told Agent Hayes. "Dr. Chen and his network are still operating, and they know Emma survived. They'll try to silence her permanently if they get the chance." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed across the junkyard. But these weren't government cars. They were black SUVs with tinted windows, moving with the coordinated precision of a military operation. Bruno appeared at Jake's side, his massive form tense with aggression. The bear's acute hearing had detected the threat before any of the humans realized they were surrounded. "Get Emma to the underground lab," Jake commanded Marcus. "Agent Hayes, how many rounds do you have?" "Not enough," she replied grimly, drawing her sidearm as the SUVs disgorged men in tactical gear. "These aren't my people. Someone leaked our location." Jake realized with cold certainty that Dr. Chen's network had found them. The rogue operatives weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here to eliminate everyone who knew the truth about their illegal experiments. The final battle for the truth was about to begin, and Jake knew that not everyone would survive the next hour. But for the first time since returning from Afghanistan, he had something worth fighting for: family, justice, and a bear who'd taught him that heroism sometimes meant accepting help from the most unexpected places. Bruno's growl echoed across the junkyard as armed figures closed in from all directions. The real war was just beginning. The truth hit Jake like a physical blow as he watched the tactical teams surround the junkyard with military precision. These weren't criminals or terrorists. They were American operatives, moving with the coordinated efficiency of elite special forces. Agent Hayes wasn't calling for backup. She was checking her weapon with the grim resignation of someone who knew reinforcements weren't coming. "Caroline?" A familiar voice called across the yard. Dr. Richard Chen emerged from the lead SUV, no longer disguising himself as a simple businessman. He wore tactical gear and carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to ordering life and death decisions. "I told you this investigation would lead nowhere productive." Agent Hayes's face went white. "Richard, you're supposed to be supervising this operation from Quantico." "I am supervising it," Chen replied coldly. "Just not the way you expected." The devastating truth unfolded like a nightmare. Agent Hayes hadn't been leading an investigation into Marcus's arms trafficking. She'd been unknowingly providing intelligence to the very network she thought she was hunting. Dr. Chen had been using FBI resources to track down witnesses and eliminate loose ends, including his own unwitting agent. 23 years we worked together, Caroline," Chen continued, his voice carrying mock sadness. "You were always too idealistic to understand that sometimes the greater good requires unpleasant choices. The research we've conducted has saved thousands of American lives." "By murdering civilians with chemical weapons?" Hayes spat, her training warring with the reality that her mentor and colleague had betrayed everything they'd sworn to protect. "By field testing antidotes and protective measures," Chen corrected. "Every dose of nerve agent we deployed taught us something new about defense against chemical attacks. The subjects in Syria, Afghanistan, Nigeria, they were going to die anyway from conventional weapons. We simply made their deaths meaningful." Jake felt Bruno tense beside him, the bear's instincts recognizing the predatory threat that Dr. Chen represented. Emma struggled to stand, supported by Marcus, her recovery from the antidote making her a living witness to crimes that powerful people wanted buried forever. "You experimented on refugees," Emma said, her voice growing stronger with righteous anger. "Families fleeing war zones, children. You turned my medical clinics into laboratories for human testing." "Your clinics provided perfect cover," Chen acknowledged without shame. "Isolated populations, minimal oversight, natural explanations for unusual symptoms. If you hadn't started asking inconvenient questions about the chemical compositions you were treating, you'd still be alive and healthy." Marcus stepped forward, his face twisted with rage and self-loathing. "You told me the weapons were going to legitimate military contractors. You made me complicit in murdering my own wife." "Your wife was collateral damage," Chen said dismissively. "Just like you'll all be if you don't cooperate now. The research continues with or without your consent. Samuel Mitchell's antidote formula belongs to the United States government, and that bear represents a valuable ongoing resource." Bruno's growl deepened to a sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. The massive bear stepped protectively in front of Emma and Marcus, his dark eyes fixed on Chen with an intelligence that made the doctor's clinical detachment falter. "You can't have him," Jake said quietly, moving to stand beside Bruno. "My grandfather rescued Bruno from people like you once. I won't let it happen again." Chen's expression hardened. "Your grandfather was a traitor who stole classified research and used it for unauthorized humanitarian activities. He cost American lives by providing aid to enemy combatants." "He saved lives," Jake corrected. "Something you stopped caring about a long time ago." The standoff stretched taut as Chen's operatives maintained their positions, weapons trained on the small group around the trailer. Agent Hayes slowly raised her hands, her service weapon conspicuously visible but not aimed at anyone, a gesture of surrender that fooled no one. "Richard," she said carefully, "there's still a way out of this. Turn yourself in, expose the network, help us shut down the illegal testing. The Bureau will consider cooperation in your sentencing." Chen laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Caroline, you still don't understand. I don't work for rogue elements within the government. I am the government. This operation has approval at the highest levels. The only crime here is Mitchell's theft of classified materials and his interference with national security operations." Jake felt the familiar weight of institutional betrayal settling on his shoulders. In Afghanistan, he'd trusted commanders who sent soldiers into ambushes for political gain. Now he was facing the same corruption on home soil, wrapped in patriotic rhetoric and justified by national security concerns. "Show her the files, Jake," Emma said suddenly. "Show Agent Hayes what your grandfather really discovered." Jake hesitated, knowing that revealing the extent of his grandfather's archives would expose the true scope of the government's illegal activities. But Emma was right. The truth was their only weapon against Chen's institutional power. Racing to the hidden entrance, Jake retrieved the most damning documents from his grandfather's collection. The files contained more than research notes. They held years of correspondence with international human rights organizations, detailed reports of illegal human experimentation, and most importantly, a complete list of every government official who'd authorized or participated in the chemical weapons testing program. "Senators, cabinet members, CIA directors," Jake read aloud as he returned, "your operation wasn't a rogue action, Dr. Chen. It was a systematic program of human experimentation that violated every international law we claim to uphold." Chen's composure finally cracked. "Those documents are classified beyond your security clearance. Possessing them is treason. Using chemical weapons on civilians is genocide," Agent Hayes said, her voice cold with professional anger. "Richard, what happened to you? When did you become the kind of monster we used to hunt?" "When I watched American soldiers die from chemical attacks we could have prevented," Chen snapped. "Every humanitarian concern, every ethical consideration means nothing when your own people are dying because you're too squeamish to gather the intelligence that could save them." Bruno chose that moment to act. The massive bear didn't attack. Instead, he walked calmly toward Chen, his movement deliberate and unthreatening. Chen's operatives tracked him with their weapons, but something about Bruno's approach made them hesitate. The bear stopped directly in front of Chen and sat down, looking up at the doctor with those impossibly intelligent dark eyes. For a moment, predator and prey faced each other in perfect stillness. Then Bruno did something that broke Jake's heart. He extended one massive paw toward Chen, the same gesture of trust he'd shown Jake during their first meeting. "Even after everything humans have done to him," Jake said softly, "he still believes we can be better." Chen stared at the bear's outstretched paw, and for a fleeting instant his clinical mask slipped to reveal something almost human underneath. "Remarkable intelligence," he murmured. "The neural complexity required for that level of social reasoning. The research applications would be extraordinary." "He's not a test subject," Jake said firmly. "He's family." The word hung in the air between them, carrying weight that went beyond species or blood relations. Family meant protection, loyalty, sacrifice for something greater than self-interest. It meant the opposite of everything Chen's program represented. Agent Hayes made her choice in that moment of distraction. Her weapon came up smooth and fast, trained on Chen's center mass. "Dr. Richard Chen, you're under arrest for crimes against humanity, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention." Chen's operatives swung their weapons toward Hayes, but Jake was already moving. Years of combat training took over as he tackled the nearest agent, using his body weight and momentum to drive the man to the ground. Marcus, inspired by his brother's courage or desperate to atone for his own crimes, threw himself at another operative. Bruno's contribution to the fight was decisive. The massive bear didn't maul or kill. Instead, he used his 400-pound bulk to pin down armed operatives, holding them immobile with careful precision while chaos erupted around them. His intelligence shone through even in combat, distinguishing between genuine threats and people who'd simply made bad choices. When the dust settled, Chen was in custody. 3 of his operatives were unconscious, and the rest had fled into the Oregon wilderness. Emma was safe, Marcus was alive to testify against his former handlers, and Bruno was nudging Jake's hand with his nose, checking for injuries with the concern of a friend. But Jake knew this victory was temporary. Chen's network extended far beyond one rogue doctor, and powerful people would want the truth buried along with everyone who knew it. The real fight was just beginning. 6 months later, Jake stood in the morning sunlight outside the newly constructed Mitchell Veterans Recovery Center, watching as Bruno gently guided a trembling young Marine through his first therapy session. The bear's massive presence somehow conveyed safety rather than threat to the PTSD-stricken veteran, his dark eyes reflecting the same patient understanding that had saved Jake's own life. The transformation of the junkyard had been miraculous. Where rusted car hulks once stood, comfortable cabins now housed veterans working through their trauma. The underground laboratory had been converted into a state-of-the-art medical facility where Dr. Emma Sterling, fully recovered and bearing her maiden name again, led a team of researchers developing treatments for chemical weapon exposure. Marcus emerged from the main building, his appearance as changed as the landscape around him. Gone was the slick tech entrepreneur. In his place stood a man wearing simple work clothes and carrying the weight of genuine remorse. His testimony against Dr. Chen's network had brought down 17 government officials and exposed decades of illegal human experimentation, but the personal cost had been devastating. The congressional hearing went better than expected, Marcus said, settling onto the bench beside Jake. Senator Williams says the Chemical Weapons Victim Compensation Act should pass by next month. Emma's antidote will be available to anyone who needs it, free of charge. Jake nodded, watching Bruno demonstrate to the young Marine how to breathe through a panic attack. The bear's calm presence seemed to anchor people in ways that human therapists sometimes couldn't achieve. "How's Emma handling the media attention?" "Better than I am," Marcus admitted. "She says being the face of chemical weapon survivors gives her a purpose bigger than her trauma. I'm proud of her, but I'm also terrified every time she testifies. There are still people out there who want this story buried." The shadow of ongoing danger hadn't disappeared with Dr. Chen's arrest. 3 of his co-conspirators remained at large, and powerful pharmaceutical companies faced billions in lawsuits if the full scope of their involvement became public. Emma received death threats weekly, Marcus lived under federal protection, and Jake slept with a loaded rifle beside his bed. But they also had allies now. Agent Hayes had been promoted to head a new FBI task force dedicated to hunting down war criminals operating on American soil. International human rights organizations provided security and publicity that made assassination attempts more difficult. Most importantly, the surviving victims of chemical weapons testing had found their voices, creating a grassroots movement that couldn't be silenced by bureaucratic cover-ups. Sarah arrived for her weekly visit, stepping out of a modest sedan that replaced her former luxury vehicles. The real estate empire was gone, liquidated to provide restitution to chemical weapons victims, but she carried herself with a dignity that wealth had never given her. Her work with veteran advocacy groups had transformed her from a calculating opportunist into someone who understood the value of service to others. "How's our newest resident?" she asked, nodding toward the young Marine who was now sitting peacefully beside Bruno, both of them watching clouds drift across the Oregon sky. "Corporal Davis is responding well," Jake replied. "Bruno has a gift for recognizing invisible wounds. Sometimes I think that bear understands trauma better than most psychologists." Sarah's expression softened as she watched the unlikely therapy session. "I owe you an apology, Jake. When Grandpa left you this place, I thought he was punishing us for our success. I never understood he was trying to save us from becoming the kind of people who measure everything by profit." "We're family," Jake said simply. "That's what family does. We help each other heal." The words carried weight, earned through months of painful honesty and genuine forgiveness. Marcus's journey from war profiteer to truth-teller had been agonizing, but it had also revealed the desperate love that had driven his initial crimes. Sarah's transformation from greedy manipulator to advocate for the dispossessed had been equally difficult, requiring her to confront the emptiness that material success had left in her soul. Dr. Emma Sterling approached their small group, her medical coat bearing the Mitchell Center's logo, a stylized bear paw print surrounding a caduceus. Her recovery from nerve agent poisoning had been complete, but the experience had changed her in fundamental ways. She moved with the purposeful stride of someone who'd seen death and chosen to spend her remaining years fighting for life. "The morning session went well," she reported. "Corporal Davis is showing significant improvement in his anxiety responses. Bruno's presence seems to activate the parasympathetic nervous system in ways we're still trying to understand." "Any word from the research team in Geneva?" Jake asked. "Dr. Hoffman's group has successfully synthesized the antidote using our protocol," Emma replied, her voice carrying quiet satisfaction. "They've treated 47 chemical weapon survivors in the past month, with complete neurological recovery in 80% of cases. Your grandfather's work is saving lives on every continent." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Samuel Mitchell's classified research, buried by government agencies to protect political interests, was now freely available to medical organizations worldwide. The same bare neural proteins that Dr. Chen had wanted to exploit for weapons development were being used to heal the victims of chemical warfare. Bruno finished his therapy session and ambled over to their group, his massive form moving with the unhurried confidence of a creature at peace with his place in the world. The bear had become something unique, not quite wild, not quite domestic, but perfectly suited to his role as healer and guardian. Jake scratched behind Bruno's ears, marveling at the journey that had brought them together. "You know what the strangest part is? I spent months thinking I was protecting Bruno, but he was protecting me the whole time. From the alcohol, from despair, from becoming someone I couldn't live with." "That's what love does," Emma said gently. "It transforms both the giver and the receiver." Agent Hayes arrived for her weekly security briefing, her FBI credentials now carrying the weight of congressional authority and international cooperation. The task force she led had become a model for investigating institutional corruption, and her partnership with the Mitchell Center had established new protocols for protecting whistleblowers and trauma survivors. "Any new threats this week?" Jake asked as Hayes joined their informal gathering. "Actually, I have good news," Hayes replied with a rare smile. "We arrested the last 2 members of Chen's inner circle yesterday. Dr. Patricia Vaughn was trying to board a flight to Malaysia with stolen research data. Her arrest closes the book on the core conspiracy." Marcus visibly relaxed at the news. "Does this mean Emma can stop looking over her shoulder?" "There are still pharmaceutical companies facing lawsuits, and some government officials who'd prefer this story disappeared," Hayes admitted. "But the immediate physical threat is over. The truth is too public now to silence through violence." As if responding to the mention of truth, Bruno stood and walked to the memorial wall that Jake had constructed near the center's entrance. Engraved granite panels listed the names of chemical weapons victims worldwide, including the members of Jake's squad who'd died in Afghanistan. Bruno often spent time near the memorial, as if understanding its significance. "He knows they're honored here," Sarah observed. "Sometimes I think Bruno understands more about healing than any of us." The afternoon brought a new arrival, a young woman whose exposure to industrial chemicals during military service had left her struggling with neurological symptoms. Emma went to greet her, while Bruno positioned himself nearby, ready to offer his unique form of therapy to another wounded soul. Jake watched the familiar routine unfold, thinking about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A junkyard had become a sanctuary. A broken veteran had found purpose. A circus bear had become a healer. A family torn apart by greed and betrayal had rebuilt itself on foundations of truth and service. The Mitchell Veterans Recovery Center represented more than successful treatment outcomes or medical breakthroughs. It stood as proof that healing was possible, even for the most damaged souls. It demonstrated that love could transcend species, that forgiveness could transform criminals into advocates, and that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships produced the most extraordinary results. As evening approached and the Oregon mountains caught the last rays of sunlight, Jake knew that his grandfather's true legacy wasn't the money or the research. It was the understanding that broken things could be made whole, and that the greatest strength came from helping others find their way back to the light. Bruno settled beside him on the bench, and together they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of hope. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected places. Jake Mitchell's journey from broken veteran to compassionate healer reminds us that it's never too late to find purpose, rebuild family bonds, and discover that love transcends every boundary we think exists. In a world that often tells us our best years are behind us, Jake's story whispers a different truth. Our greatest contributions may still lie ahead, waiting in the form of someone or something who needs exactly what we have to offer. Bruno the bear didn't just save Jake's life. He showed him that healing happens when we stop focusing on our own pain and start noticing the wounds around us. For those of us who've raised families, served our country, or simply survived decades of life's unexpected turns, Jake's transformation speaks to a universal longing, the desire to matter, to be needed, to leave something beautiful behind. His grandfather's legacy wasn't money or research. It was the understanding that broken people and broken creatures can heal each other when they're brave enough to trust again. The Mitchell Veterans Recovery Center stands as proof that second chances aren't just for the young, and that sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest strengths. Whether it's mentoring a grandchild, volunteering at a shelter, or simply showing up for a neighbor in need, we all have a Bruno waiting for us. Someone whose healing depends on our willingness to step beyond our comfort zone and offer the gift of presence. What unexpected friendship or purpose has transformed your life when you needed it most? Have you ever found healing by helping someone else heal? Share your story below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.